Greetings. Good evening. Welcome
Good
to the
evening.
gutter. Everyone ends up here eventually. It's only a matter of time. Tonight, uh,
Yes.
you're going to enter a world where lines and panels intersect with low editorial review and control. A crossroads of sorts. Not quite the Twilight Zone, but a place where teenage angst and the traumas of transition to adulthood in a world of maniacal villains are woven intricately into a pattern that usually comes from some sort of conclusion around 22 pages. Journey with us into a world of limitless imagination, if not deeply seated cynical outlooks on a normally cheerful world, which does address the weakly constructed pots. Experience a story of a morally sound and ethically faithful teenager bestowed with powers unsought, to a degree unwanted, and most definitely unmastered. A character reborn out of an era that allotted more to face-melting art than the fine story craft that preceded it. And the less we say about where editorial went, the better, for that matter. Tonight, we talk about something that is fairly outside the realm of what we have done here on the gutter up to this point. For the topic du jour is only over 30 years into the past, and it is well outside the golden and silver age semblances that we normally cover. From the minds of Steve Ditko and Stan Lee erupted Spider-Man. And on August of 1990, a majorly up-and-coming artist at Marvel released his own take on the iconic character with Spider-Man #1. That man, of course, was none other than Todd McFarlane, the tumultuous one, the Todd Father himself. Now president of Image Comics, perhaps more so than anyone else other than Jim Lee, benefited from the late 80s turn Marvel made, investing more power into its artists and moving away from an editorial story direction that had existed under the very successful period from Jim Shooter. Todd was in the right place at the right time with the right tool set. And based on sales figures alone, you can't argue that he succeeded. And while I can wax poetic about my personal feelings regarding this change in direction for both Marvel and comics in general, one thing is completely undeniable. Everything changed, and Spider-Man #1 was a part of it, if not the start of what would eventually lead to Image Comics, which in and of itself revolutionized an industry. So without further ado, to ride this electric psychedelic highway of luminous light, the ones and zeros, if you will, across the internet pipelines, our guest, Mad Ruth, is one
Hell,
of the members of this book's particular legacy. Greetings, sir. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, man. This one is really special, and like we were talking about a little bit in the pre-show, we've had a number of guests. This is our 10th episode of the Gutter. And on a lot of them, we talk beforehand, and I find something that inspired them or that associates with their art. In this one, this is a great example of direct inspiration. You were really this book really resonated with you.
Absolutely, yes. So, my first comic book, I don't want to give you my whole life story here, but the very first two comics I ever had was G.I. Joe #50 and Miami Mice #1 in 1986. From there, I just pretty much grabbed G.I. Joe and Transformers. I didn't pay attention to any artist names, so I didn't know all the great legends like Kirby and Ditko and Byrne. Didn't have any concept of that. However, my best friend, he was buying Spider-Man, and he's the one who first showed me Amazing Spider-Man 298 and said, "Have a look at this thing." I was like, "Wow, who's that?" Todd McFarlane. He's Canadian. I'm Canadian as well, right? So, wow, that's really interesting.
We'll try not
And
to
show,
hold that against you.
yeah. And obviously that's the very first appearance of Venom, 297, 298, and we all know Amazing Spider-Man 300. And wow, okay, maybe my GI Joe and Transformer comics aren't so cool. So, right? But obviously out came, and we already talked about it, Amazing Spider-Man #1. Sorry, Spider-Man #1 when basically Todd McFarlane was sort of, I don't know, I don't know what to call it, between him and Stan Lee, but he was like not happy. So Stan gave him his own title after issue 300, made $3.5 million, I believe, is what he made on issue 300.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's crazy. So needless to say, Stan gave him his own title, exactly as you discussed. Said, "Fine, you can just have your own Spider-Man book without the prefix, just Spider-Man, and you can be free and you can do what you want to do." So, as you said, they literally gave Todd a blank check and just said, "Go with it. You can just do what you want." And as you said, out came Spider-Man 1. And I mean, going through the interior pages, as you talked about, inspired. I don't know if you want to.
Well, I mean, you're talking about a book. And for those of you that aren't aware of what this run meant, the first copy sold 2.5 million individual issues on initial release. Original artwork from of pages from this run have gone for over $500,000. I think the most recent one went for around $700K. So that gives you an idea of how collectible it is. As a comparison, the most recent Kirby page that I was able to find that went was for $150,000. So when you're outselling Kirby on your price point by a factor of more than 5, there's something about this run. And it was a short-lived run. He wasn't really on it for that long. Only a handful of storylines before the inevitable happened. And Image was formed based off of what Image, both Marvel and DC, were doing at this time, which was really pushing the artist over anything else and putting them out there in the fore. But before we get into any of that, I do have to greet the chat. And Eric Grant, as he often is yet again the first commenter. So welcome, Eric Grant. We also have former Gutter member and continual. He keeps on showing up. He must like it, slumming us with us down here in the gutter. With Odin Dasco. Oh, great to see Odin. We've got Eric the Guapo. Couldn't ask for a better person to be in the chat. Eric, both a huge comic fan and outspoken in his opinions. Always appreciate that. Pride, Flowers, Rainbow. Oh, okay. You might be in the wrong place, my friend. But yay! Oh, I know who that is. Never mind. So this is the Gutter. Indeed, Eccentric. This is indeed the Gutter. Welcome. Good to have you here. And then it looks like everybody else is just... we got Jay, Desolate Soul Studios. Great to see you, sir. And then Ray Hallock, Tugsweb guy. Awesome to see you. Thank you for joining us. So let's get into the meat of this a little bit. And when we talk about Todd's Spider-Man, and I used this analogy with you in the pre-show, this book is something else because the artwork is purely, absolutely face melting. It is something that you just don't see at all from this era. It almost like it erupted out of nowhere. And Spider-Man 300 and all of Todd's other work, these books are something different, man. There's something about them, and as we go through some of them, you can definitely see where Todd is headed with what eventually happens. But contrary to a lot of the light shade that I can throw to Todd's time on this book, there's a surprising amount of elegance that's engaging in the content of the story. Like the plotting is thin, and at times there doesn't really seem to be a general theme. But what you see as you're going through it is he's using this to understand how writing a comic works. Right. And he's got the concepts down. It's just execution. And there's no editorial review. Like, that is very clear from issue 1 through the conclusion of his time on this book. Nobody would tell him, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. So it's a great looking book, but it's a book that's carried by the art. And arguably that's a trend that I think this book sets for the rest of the 90s because of how well it sold. And, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've got an opinion that contraries to me, but I think this also still resounds to this very day in a lot of what we see both in the indie market and a lot in the mainstream market. But I think the most intriguing aspect is what Todd brought to this book, which was it's not your traditional Spider-Man book. It's a horror book in the most romantic sense of a callback to the tone of what Warren Comics or what Warren was doing with some of their stuff. it's an ode to a different era of comics, probably the 50s and the 60s, but it's done in a style that only Todd could do really at this time, and it's a superficial tone of terror. He really plays with a lot of things to mess with your mind, and some of these images that we're going to go through are pretty wild, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
Dark.
go
Yeah.
into go into that a little bit. You're much more of an expert of this on this series than me. So
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. That's bang on feedback. I mean, like I was trying to say to you that I'm more of an Image sort of fanboy, but everything that happened with this series led to everything that I loved going on there. So, yeah, right from Lizard, the Lizard in the first 5 issues there for Torment. Yeah, you
yep,
could tell it's a horror story. It's even Spider-Man's not the happy-go-lucky, teenage boy growing up in Queens. Yeah, like as you said, if we go through the images, they are very dark and disturbing, and teeth and gnawing and like.
well, when we talk about the teeth too, I mean everything about, and this is I've just got a couple of select images, and
Yeah.
like man, you keyed in on something that's you keyed in on teeth, and teeth are very prevalent throughout all of this. Everything is, it's a lot of gaping maw with just massive sharp fangs, and everything is just it. You could take a lot of these pages and understanding that they're put through that 90s hyper realism art filter that was being done at the time, that really Todd, I think, arguably established, and with a little bit of help from Jim Lee. They're it's 50s, it's 60s horror books. It's really shocking. So what was it about it? Was it that aspect that it wasn't your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, that it was, hey, I'm your friendly, nihilistic Spider-Man with a hard edge?
Well, for me, like you said, it's the artwork. The artwork absolutely blew me away. The full page bleeds, the panels bleeding right off the page, right? The focus on teeth and eyes and claws, and like the dark contrasts, and Spider-Man's suit getting torn off him, and like his shoulder, like the line art. Like I agree. If you put the storytelling aside, the artwork is just, I never saw that up until Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run. Just it was the first of it, and that's what eventually made me an Image fanboy. So,
Right. Well, and I think when you go through it, there's something about some of these panels, and I want to talk about this one in particular. No one, not John Romita Sr., who we just lost, not Steve Ditko, who created the character, tapped into whatever Todd was pulling into from his time on this book in particular. And we can talk. I mean, it really. I guess let me put up a little bit of a guideline here. I'm only talking about Todd McFarlane's work on this book when I talk about what he did with Spider-Man, because Todd is pulling from something he's drawing Spider-Man a little bit into the shadow. Not enough that he's fully enveloped by it, but just enough that you notice that his suit is brightly colored and it contrasts against all the darkness that's around him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really deftly done. And in panels like this, you really get that. There's dark moments where his face is in shadow, but the rest of his suit is really contrasting against that. And it seems to be a heavy inspiration from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight. At least that's what I'm pulling, is his tone of what he's trying to bring across. And it also doesn't always work. It's just as much as he's learning the storycraft side of it, he's learning how to play with things.
Right.
And I think a lot of what is going to come in a few years after these issues with Spawn is really he's learning how to delve into that darkness that he encapsulated with that character and executed so well. But when you look at it, he's stretching forms, he's playing with angles, he's playing with action shots. You've got and we'll get into this later with some of the Hobgoblin stuff. He really plays with almost like a Sam Keith or a Dave McKean elongation of form. Mm-hmm. To really harness that terror. It's body horror on a panel. it's really unique. Like I've never thought of it that way, but kind of flipping through it, the exaggeration to the nines, man. It's always like it's the Spinal Tap. Let's crank that thing to 11, and the world too is a creation of it. So I mean, it really was shocking, kind of flipping through these to look at them through a little bit more of a modern eye and see this. There's a deep-seated cynical aspect to it, but Spider-Man is always held up, and I think that maybe says a little bit about what Ditko and Lee created and what McFarlane was really holding up here. Is despite the darkness of these books and the heavy tones, he's somehow manages, I think, at times to like make Spider-Man and make Peter more heroic than he ever was before. The story doesn't hit, but the art certainly does.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all that feedback. That's phenomenal. Yeah, definitely. Like Peter Parker explaining. Yeah, I mean, he's dealing with battle. He's dealing with his enemies. He's dealing with his issues with his own mind and his marriage to Mary Jane throughout the book. Dealing with just balancing the life. I can't explain just everything that when I picked up this series, how it was something I hadn't read before or seen before. In comics, but then again, like I said, I only read G.I. Joe and Transformers. So
right. So as an outsider coming into this book, I mean, and when I describe this art as face melting, and I have to show. I mean, I have to show. This is face melting art. This is it. It's insane, and when you're talking about this kind of a panel or this kind of a page and you see it and you're in your preteens or you're an early teen, man, you don't care about the story until like 3 weeks later when you revisit the issue and you're like, oh, well, there's really not much story, but my God, the art. And that's like issue after issue after issue, the resonance of how great the art was. It blows away. You don't care about the story. It's this weird thing. And I think this book is probably the first one I ever saw that on, other than maybe a handful of Moon Knight, where there was such cool splash pages that I didn't care, but I'm a Moon Knight fanboy, or at least I was until they destroyed him. But, when you see something like this, I mean, how does this resonate with you? What's the... Looking back on it, and you recently reread a bunch of these too prior to the show. What's your takeaway looking back on it now with a little bit more of I guess a matured brain?
Well, I mean, like I was always into dark side stuff and horror and watching horror movies and stuff. So again, just tying into the fact that it felt like something demonic, something dark. The creatures like Scarecrow, that's not that, like Hobgoblin didn't look like that before. Lizard never looked like that before. Like he transformed every character in that book to be from like a fairy tale, like just the absolute most nightmare version of Ghost Rider or Lizard or Hobgoblin. It's just every book that he came out with, I was just dying to pick it up, have a flip through, and see what he was doing with the artwork again. I mean, everything's three-dimensional, like to go through the pages. The panels bleed off in all kinds of different corners. Splash pages just thrown in there, at random. Like nobody was doing that. All comics that I'd seen up until that point were very, scripted. Panels stayed inside the pages. I mean, I guess that's the only way I can answer that question. But.
Right. Well, I think Jay from Desolate Souls Studios says, it was a darker, grittier art, and the storyline that was great. It was a contrast to what we were used to with Spider-Man books. And I definitely agree. I mean, as I said, I think that sums up kind of what I was dancing around if I didn't directly say it at all. And then also, I'd like to take a moment and say, welcome to Dan Plagle. Great to see you, Dan. So, when you're... Well, I mean, really, there's, in my mind, you've got Torment, the storyline with the Lizard. You've got Perceptions, which shows a team up with Wolverine, which I did want to address again because there does seem to be a lot of influence of Frank Miller in Todd here. And I don't know if that's him trying to pull out what he thought was like really good from some of Miller's stuff, like The Dark Knight and his Daredevil run. But you get these moments where he's playing around with talking heads and trying to kind of like lightly address social issues or try to create a social theme in the book that contrasts with the main plot line. And he fumbles it. Like, I don't think there's one example where it's well executed.
Right.
But you can see what he's trying to do. And it's one of those things where, as a kid reading these, I just kind of glossed over it. Now being in my 40s, going back and reading some of them, it was evident that he was trying to make it a little bit more serious and give it a little bit more gravitas. I don't think it ever hit.
With him, I think, like, and he even goes into this too, like, he really wanted to just do his own thing. And even though Marvel had given him free reign of this, it still really wasn't his own thing in his opinion because it wasn't his characters. So like you said, it is definitely Frank Miller's Wolverine that he's channeling. There's no doubt about it, costume and everything. But you could tell by perception he was sort of like exactly as you said. I mean, I don't want to criticize Todd McFarlane, but yeah, I don't know. It's kind of tricky to touch on that. But yeah, definitely the story gets weak. It does get weak in perception.
Well, never feel bad for criticizing an artist because everybody has an opinion. Right? I mean, there are people out there that will look at, they'll look at the statue of David and say, well, there's a flaw. Or they'll look at the Last Supper and say there's a flaw. The Mona Lisa, people have issues with that, artistically, critic-wise. You're not stacking 15 plastic red buckets on top of each other. Like, everybody can agree that's stupid. We're talking about art here, and nobody argues, and I don't think I've ever heard somebody say that Todd is not a great artist. But what usually happens, in my experience, especially during this era, when they were focused on art and really pushing art, and whether it's Jim Lee on X-Men, or whether it's Todd McFarlane on SpiderMan, you get artists that are trying to be writers. And sometimes, issue here, issue there, it really works and it blends well. Other times, it's an absolute failure. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. You're not criticizing Todd the artist, you're criticizing Todd the writer. And I don't think even today Todd McFarlane is going to say he's the end-all be-all of writers. He recognized that when Spawn was really taken off. He hired some of the best writers in the world for comics at the time to write issues for him. I think that's a pretty good sign he recognized where his deficiencies were. But he is absolutely a very strong creator in what he's producing. And I don't think anybody can argue that. Now, I say that, and then right as I say that, Antoine Dennison in the chat says, I think Todd McFarlane is a charismatic creator, but I think his art is crap. And, I run into this a lot with Sam Keith. I'm a huge Sam Keith fan. And I'll get the occasional person that'll say, well, Keith, all of his stuff looks weird. And, all I would say is, well, go to Hieronymus Bosch. If you can see, all of Hieronymus Bosch's paintings are psychotic. They're contorted. It's a twisted, warped view of the world. But it's art because it's so well done. Even if you don't get it, even if you don't like it, you can't argue that it's not well executed. And you might, again, not like it, but it's well done. That's the difference between a lot of like the neo-modern art movement or, 4 individual cans of Campbell's soup with a different filter put on them. That's graphic design. We're talking about art here. And even though you may not like his style or Sam Keith's style or any of the other guys, Bill Sekunovich also is in that category. Dave McKean is also in that category. It's definitely different. And for comics, his sequential art is very good. He, especially in this series, and he understands action really happens between the panels, and what you're seeing in each panel is the resultant. Now, I would like to have your thoughts on some of the pages that I'm going to throw up, or some of the panels that I'm going to throw up here. He does play around quite a bit with this and experiment throughout this entire run, and this is, I think, a great example of that. He does what was your takeaway on some of when you were going back through it on some of the more graphic styles that he was playing with?
Well, for starters, like right here, you've got the end of the doom, 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 doom. So that's been going on for 5 issues. The heartbeat of Lizard. But yeah, no, I mean, like you even see it here, right? Like with the birds coming out of the panels, and the panels just full bleeding off the page. Like I could go through individual issues, but I hadn't seen that in comics up until that point, right? Like Todd's just taking pages and just basically looking at them as real estate and deciding with every page what's the cool thing I can do to this page, what's the cool thing I can do to this page. And when you flip through the books, like I don't want to take away from the panel that you have on now.
No, we can take that down.
But like issue 4, he decided to color it himself. So he hadn't colored anything, but Todd said, I'm just going to color issue 4. And the colors in issue 4 are bizarre. Like they're color palettes you've never seen before, but that was him taking it on his own. Issue 16, I don't know if you're going to get to the artwork in issue 16. Oh, yeah, I'll bring that one up. But he decided to do the whole book sideways. He's like, hey, I'm bored. I'm going to print the whole book sideways and make you read it that way instead. Yeah. like I said, it was just, everything was nuts. He just did whatever the hell he wanted to do from page to page, and it was just an adventure to see what craziness he was going to throw in next.
Right. So when you talk, and that's something that's interesting, because again it falls into that the experimentation. Do you when you went back and read through these, because I mean Spider-Man, Peter Parker, he's a fundamental hero, right? He was born out of an age where you had the event, eventually you get the Avengers, you've got the Justice Society, you've got the Justice League, you've got the Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four, yeah.
But Peter Parker stands apart from all of them because Peter Parker's a kid.
Right.
He's still learning, and he's learning in the most strange way possible, because in addition to all of the awkwardness of adolescence, he's given through the spider bite these powers, and he's got to figure it out. So it's not, he didn't seek this, he wasn't born into it, it was a total accident, which is another thing. I mean, he shares that with the Fantastic Four, but he's not Thor. He's not Captain America, who volunteered. He's not Black Panther, who was born into that mantle. He's just a kid that a spider bit him, and the next thing he knows, he's got powers and he's got to figure it out. He's fumbling his way through all of the hoops and hazards of life with one more extra burden. And he ends up doing something that Batman doesn't do, doing something that Superman doesn't do. Spider-Man is Peter Parker just as much as Peter Parker is Peter Parker. Batman is Batman. Bruce Wayne is the mask that he wears. Superman is Clark Kent is who Clark Kent is. Superman is his mask. Right? At the core, those are those characters. Peter Parker is just always Peter Parker. He's going to wisecrack just as much, but when he puts that mask on, he's got a little bit more confidence. And so he's more wisecracky. And I think that's the subtle difference. That's what makes Spider-Man so engaging. And McFarlane hits that home for sure throughout this run. That aspect of the confidence builder is when I've got the suit on. Because then you see it in some of the fight sequences. As the suit starts to get tattered, he starts to question, can I do this? And it's this great moral conundrum that's well woven into the art, but not so much the story. Mm-hmm. So while I think all these hit great tones, I mean, it never settles into anything that resembles coherent storytelling in long form across multiple issues. There's pieces there, but when you're talking about it, I think there's a core that you can see where he wants to go, like I said earlier. But it's almost like he's just not sure how to get there. And so, like when you look at some of these pages, and these you can't. Again, man, the art, the shadow, the understanding of how to capsulate it. he's got Wolverine vast in shadow because of how he's presented in the story, and this is a panel out of the Perception storyline.
Right.
That he uses characters to contrast all the glory and the positive aspects of Spider-Man, and they're always dark and shadowy in Masks, which is where this panel comes from, which is that run with Hobgoblin. It's Hobgoblin and Ghost Rider, and you've got Spider-Man contrasting with Ghost Rider and how they're handling different things and how are they going to address it. And here, this was the panel, and like we talked a little bit about this beforehand too, the elongation of form and making Hobgoblin almost this demonic entity. Which, when you look at this, if you've read any Spawn, and then you go back and then you look at how he treated Morbius, I mean, you're seeing aspects of everything that he's going to pour into Spawn in just a few years. Or a year in the case of some of these panels. Yeah. So when walking out of this run and then going into, because as you said, you're an Image fanboy, that's really where you gravitate to. When you walk out of this and you go into
Spawn issue
like
1.
Spawn or any of those other books that were over there at Image, what did you hearken back to this? Did you see that, or was it?
It was in the news, right? It was a big deal, right? Todd McFarlane, Jim, and Rob Liefeld said they're turning their backs on Marvel. They're walking away from the mainstream. And then it took like a year for anything to happen. So it was all hype from 91 to 92. And then obviously, like I went in my comic book shop every week, right? And I'd grab a fistful of books and leave. And then all of a sudden, the Image books started showing up on the rack in 92. And I would just be like, yep, I'll take Spawn, and I'll take, Supreme, and I'll take Young Blood, and all, like look at these things. These books are insane. They were drawing stuff that I got hooked with his Spider-Man run, and that was it. I was just sold. And I know people don't really like Image fanboys, but that became my age in comics. So it's the line art, mostly the line art.
So when you reflect back on this, because I mean, there's 4 storylines to me, essentially, that are really resonate from this. Like we previously mentioned, Torment, which is the Lizard. Perceptions is his team up with Wolverine, and that's the one that has the themes of what I would consider moral outrage, kind of layered within it, or attempted to layer within it. They're more just kind of laid on the surface. That's kind of the ode to Frank Miller. And then you've got Masks, which and I don't know about you, but if you're gonna go out and read any arc from this, I think Masks is the one you're going to want to read. Mm-hmm. Having Hobgoblin and Ghost Rider contrasted against Spider-Man, and Todd's art is just absolutely killer. And then Sub-City with Morbius.
Right.
Which is the last panel I added, which I showed, which I'll pull up again, because, I mean, if you were a fan of Spawn and you don't see Violator in that, I don't know what to tell you, man. Because like he's telegraphing what he's going to be doing. But he had such a great take on so many of these wonderful, wonderful characters that it's just exceptional when you look back through what he was trying to do. And really, it's a shame in my mind, and because I'm a story-focused guy, that he didn't have a little bit of a heavier hand of editorial kind of guiding him.
Yeah, these books are definitely like, look at my artwork, look what I can do. Like a lot of these pages you go through, they're just full-page splashes, double-page splashes. When he puts the black costume on, there's a full-page splash of him in there. Like you said, Wolverine's got his own full-page splash. Like, like it's just, yeah. Yeah, there's Kraven.
Yeah, and before we moved on, I did want to talk about this, because you can read Kraven's Last Hunt, and you get an impression of Kraven, and then you read this, and the impression that you get from Kraven is something entirely different. And when I talk about dark, when I talk about you're shifting the tone of Spider-Man into something else, this was a change. Kraven is almost, I'm going to choose my words carefully here. He's hungry for something that is eluding him. And it's layered, but it's there, and it's really weird. But it works with, like I said, with that horror overtone that seems to be present throughout all of this. Todd really hit on something that was like, it's super creepy, man.
I think Todd was probably going through some darkness or something.
Yeah. But yeah, and so all of this leads us to you, because we talk a lot about, like, well, the story was kind of weak, or it was a little light, or the plotting and the theme could have been handled better. But at the end of the day, this was 30 years ago. That run started in August of 1990. Here we are, it's 2023, and you cite this as not only like one of your favorites, but what caused you to want to make comics. So could you kind of, how do we get from A to B on that one?
Okay, so again, going through just Todd McFarlane's like just insane layouts with the pages. Oh, can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah, no, I got you. I'm just coughing.
Okay. No, all good. So again, going through those just insane layouts of Todd's in this SpiderMan run, I didn't see it so much carry over into Spawn, but it resonated with these because they just felt experimental. Like I said, he just went and did whatever he wanted to do. I wanted to do the same thing with the comic, and I imagined making my own comic book series. I as well want to put insane panels, page panels that bleed out past the borders. The artwork bleeds out past the borders. Like, I sat down with my artist and I talked about this run with him and how I wanted to emulate that. So definitely that's what inspired me to do the very same thing with Soltac. And if you have read the Todd McFarlane SpiderMan series and you've read Soltac, you will see a lot of my panel layouts and stuff with the sound effects, going across double pages, the panels blowing off the page. You can tell where I got that from. It's
right. And so your book is Soltac, and it's currently on Fund My Comic. There's a direct link down below in the description to check it out. But talk, I guess, when you're talking about that inspiration layer, granted, you're going to break the panel and you're going to do this multi-layered storytelling where you're using the art to really like push ideas and limit your story context. But what was it that, because that's a huge jump, right? I understand all the technical aspects, but when you look at Todd's art, what made you want to make a comic? What was it that, like, man, I want to tell a story like this?
It's just the escapism. It's just picking up a comic book, and I mean, the same thing for all of us, right? Being able to forget about the world around me, forget about the life, like the stuff going on around me, feeling like I'm a part of a story that nobody else has read, and I've now been part of a special journey that very few other people have read or experienced or appreciated. I don't know. I just love the medium. I don't. I always said that's just something I want to do someday myself if I was ever lucky enough. So.
Okay, so I guess let me rephrase, because you hit on two things that I want to kind of go back to.
Okay.
One is it's the medium. Well, what is it about comics, and what was it specifically about McFarlane's Spider-Man that made you go, yes, I could write a novel, I could do illustrated fiction, but no, I want to do this? Like, what was it about it that really was like, man, this is it. This is how my story needs to be told.
Right. Well, okay. So tying into, like, again, I'm a writer and I'm an amateur writer, and this is my first writing project. Telling stories with comic books as opposed to a novel. Obviously, comic books are more of a visual medium than they are for reading. I mean, if you want to just do straight reading, you should read a novel, not a comic book. So just the ability and the freedom to tell a story, not with as many pages, not working as hard, I guess, to accomplish the story. It's so much easier to convey the story that you want to do by conveying the images laid out in panels in sequence, and then adding much less writing to that than it would be to sit down and write a novel. So, I mean, it's just naturally the best medium I can think of to tell a story without making a crazy Hollywood movie production is to do it in comics. And that's just my giveaway to being how I wanted to do it. So
does your story adapt to the format, or does the form do you develop your format around the story?
so it's very much a collaboration. Um, each page has its own real estate. So telling my story, I know on a page with however many panels between me and Gonzalo we tell to do it, from top left corner to bottom right corner, this is how much story we have to convey. However many panels we do it in, whatever words we do it in, that's what we have to accomplish on that page. And I basically look at each page like its own separate real estate, very much the way Todd McFarlane did with SpiderMan, where he just looked at a page and just like, what am I going to do with this page? What's the coolest thing I can do with this page to convey the story elements I need to pile as much story in there, as much artwork in there, blow those panels out, make it 3D, make it really step out so that the reader feels like they're getting their money's worth with every page that they turn. I don't know if that helps. But
No, it doesn't help or not help. It's your answer to a question,
right.
which is it's a personal response. As a creator, you're gonna always have your own take. It's there's no correct answer to any of this. I'm trying to get down to the bare bones of like, man, why did Mad Ruth do this? And it's one of those things, right? That I mean, this is going to be on the internet forever. And
Right.
if you have a really successful book in 15 years, in 20 years, imagine having this kind of access to talk to a nascent creator back when Kirby was still around, and like, hey, what are you doing on this particular book? Why did you choose to do this? Why not this way? Why did you choose this? I think this is important because it gives you a little bit of eyesight both into who you are as a creator and why you're choosing to do that. The why being more important based off of what your inspirations are and what that comic lineage looks like. Why specifically of all the books you could talk about did you choose to talk about Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man? And we've gone over all the reasons why you could talk about him, but what are your reasons? And then the next question, which you should see coming, is how do we see the inspiration of Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man carried over into Soltac?
Hmm. So again, just the freedom of it, right? Him being given his own title, his own freedom to do whatever he wanted to do with every page. I as an own independent comic book creator with my own story, I have the exact same freedom with every single page that I have. I can look at I can look at my story elements, look at what I'm trying to accomplish with my panels, and then between me and the artist, just figure out how do we want to accomplish this amount of story and how many panels we want to do it. To sit there, no, I want that to blow right off the page. I want that to extend. And just changing the dynamics of the reading of it, making it exciting, making each page exciting. Like that's the same way. I couldn't wait when I had Spider-Man to turn the page to see what insanity waited for me on the next page. And I just very much wanted to do the same thing with Soltac. Whoever picked it up, that they wouldn't want to put it down, that they would want to read it continuously, and that the action just keeps driving the story, that the story doesn't have any lulls. There isn't sitting around and talking with empty dialogue. And it just, I mean, this isn't something I very much am waiting for the next issue. No. What brought me with Spider-Man is I couldn't wait to grab the next issue. I couldn't read to finish that page. Every single issue of Spider-Man I read in one sitting. There wasn't any, one or two pages and come back to that later. No. I couldn't wait to get to the back. I couldn't wait to get to the store. I couldn't wait to get the next copy. And I very much wanted to do that with my own book.
Now, Soltac in and of itself is more of I would classify it as more of a sci-fi action. You don't really have those horror elements that we see. That's the subtext of this particular run with the elongated figures and it's the disruption of the human form.
Right.
How did that inspire you at all with the darker, more of the heavy tones that were being elicited in McFarlane's work? Did you try to bring that out both in your writing and then in working with your artist?
Yeah. So unfortunately, again, I'm not the artist like Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane being the artist means he can just do whatever the hell he wants, right? I'm limited because I'm the writer. I'm not the artist. So I am sort of handicapped at the end of the day. My artist is only going to do what my artist can do. But with that dark elements, in my book, I have what's called the AI Hive. And I don't know if you've had a chance to get into those guys yet, but they aren't exactly normal human proportions. Their arms are a little longer, elongated. Their legs are elongated because they're cybernetic and they don't, And so I was hoping, and I'm trying to achieve that with that AI Hive to make them like a nightmare, make them, scary and dark, exactly the way Todd did with Lizard and Hobgoblin. So it's near the end of the book. I haven't really had a chance to fully explore that, but I do intend to do that with the villains in my book. So they're supposed to be scary as hell.
So when you talk about they're supposed to be scary as hell, is it a psychological terror? Are you looking to evoke a visceral terror, or are you trying to play with both? Because you talk a little bit about, hey, I'm not the artist, but as the writer, you're crafting that scene. You're offering the description that the writer's going to draw. So when they're inspired by what you are describing, they're going to be drawing that, and they should be getting across. And obviously, from what I've read of your book, I really get the sense that you and your artist are simpatico, that you've got a really great understanding and a solid working relationship. And one of the things you've said in the past is that, you thumbnailed out this entire book. So I think you are selling yourself a little short with your understanding of how the page construction goes. So that's kind of where I'm going, is as a writer that thumbnailed out this book, what was the central tone you were going for? So when anybody sits down and goes to the Fund My Comic link that's again in the description, and gets a copy of Soltac, The Betrayal, Volume 1, what's the feeling they're going to get when they finish that, when they're engaged and they're reading it and they hit every page and they hit that last page? What are you looking to have them walk away from it with?
No, that's okay. Yeah, that's great. So, again, looking at my book, if you open my book, what I'm hoping to achieve for the reader is that each page, I try to, as best as I can, to bring something they haven't seen before. Make the page dynamics, the panels, try to break up those boring, just, 2 panels here, 3 panels here, 2 panels here. Try to break up those boring, monotonous layouts that everyone does. Try to have panels that have full bleeds. Creating angles, like I would sit there with the angles, and sure, you would want to draw that panel logically a certain way, but let's just turn that angle backwards and have a look at it differently. I'm really hoping when readers do see it, I am channeling that same energy that I had for Todd McFarlane's SpiderMan, in that readers are looking at this and saying, wow, that's something different. That's something unique. I haven't seen someone design a page like that before, because it does feel like people are getting too afraid to explore the real estate of the page, which is what Todd clearly wasn't afraid to do with SpiderMan. I just want to do the same thing. It's my book. Let's just go nuts. I don't know.
I know. I like it, man. I think that's something that more people need to consider, is to find something that's their inspiration and take their own angle on it. So many people try to do a rote copy, right? And rote copies are exactly what they are. Is when you Xerox something, it's never the same quality. But when you're trying to do your own angle, you get something that's unique and you have your own voice, and that echoes throughout the pages. And what we're talking about is Soltac. And when you look at that cover, I get the semblance of what you're talking about. So I think that's fantastic, man. So as we kind of close it out and wrap it up, if you had to encapsulate everything that we talked about here into one sentence or 2 sentences, what's the general link between Soltac and your inspiration of Todd McFarlane? Specifically in his Spider-Man run.
Like, just don't be afraid to experiment. Like, push the boundaries of the page. Throw in something crazy, throw in something wild, throw in something dynamic, be adventurous. Make each of those pages exciting. Readers are paying a lot of money to make your book, buy your book. It just give them an experience that they haven't experienced before, something unique and something exciting. That's the link between both books for me.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to say this, my friend. I think all of the everything we've talked about, all these issues hit great tones, but they don't really coalesce into anything it's not great storytelling.
Right.
It's not something that really resonates with you as a reader. The art always will on these issues. But from what I've read so far of Soltac, and I am half done, and I will be finished by Sunday evening, because Sunday evening at 10:30 I will be on a panel reviewing this book over on Well Read's channel. I encourage everybody to hop on over there. If you're on the fence about back in Soltac, join us over there. I think you'll be very surprised with what almost everybody has to say, in a very positive way for this being a first-time creation. I've been very impressed so far. But when you're going back to McFarlane's SpiderMan, there's a core, like we've said repeatedly on this, that you can see where he wants to go. And I just don't think he's sure how to get there. And I think based off of what I've read so far of Soltac and everything I've seen, and based off your answers so far, I think you know where you want to go. And yes. I think you're already well ahead of the curve with that regard. So when it comes down to it, you understand the medium, you understand why you chose the medium, you have a strong foundation, you know where your inspiration lie, and most importantly, not only do you know the story, but you understand what pacing and plotting is. And I don't think those are two things that cannot be oversold enough if you have a writer that understands how that needs to work and works well with their artist. So
thank you.
But my friend, thank you so much for joining me tonight in the gutter.
Thank you as well.
Well, don't say thank you yet. I mean, you're still in the gutter. So,
right.
The world has yet to see what the final result will be. But thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. This has been The Gutter.
This is blood for blood and by the gallons. This is the old days, and the bad days, the all or nothing days. They're back. There's no choices left.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.